I want to start with what the Rambam writes in the second chapter of Hilchos Yesod Torah, the laws of the fundamentals of the Torah, and then we should meditate on it for a bit. The great and awesome God, this great and awesome God, it's a mitzvah to love Him, and the Yira Mimenu. Yira in Hebrew contains two ideas. One is what could be said in Hebrew as pachad, just fear, and the other is awe. Yira is used in biblical Hebrew both ways, so I think we have to include both concepts. So there's a mitzvah to love Him, and a mitzvah to have fear and awe for Him. He quotes verses. What is the way in which to arrive at, to achieve love of Him and yira for Him? When someone analyzes, meditates on, focuses on God's actions and creatures, which are astounding, great, I just learned with one of my chavusas what the Gaon of Vilna says, the difference between nes and pella. A nes is something that goes against nature. A pella is something that happens only once. You could have standing miracles that happen all the time, like the 10 miracles that happened in the temple every day, all the time, the first temple. So, although it's miraculous, if you could get used to it. A pella is something which is unparalleled. So, Maimonides here says, if you think about, meditate on God's actions and creatures which are unparalleled, great and unparalleled, and from them you will see His wisdom, which has no limit, no evaluation, no limit. Immediately, He will love and praise, glorify, and desire, a great desire to know the author of creation. And he quotes a verse from Psalms. Now, I want to make two remarks here. First of all, what is not said here is that if you study the creation, you'll come to know the Creator. If you study science, that'll lead you to theology. That's not what the Rambam is saying. Many people have interpreted it that way. I know because I used to also. But that's not what he says. He doesn't say you look at the world of nature starting with a premise that it might very well be just natural, nothing behind it whatsoever. And by analyzing it carefully enough, you'll come to see that it isn't self-supporting, it didn't derive from itself, and it didn't derive by accident, but it was planned with intelligent design and all that. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, what is the way to come to love and fear HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Who is he talking to? Someone who's already a believer. He believes that God gave the Torah. He believes that God created the universe. But there are two mitzvos that he's not yet doing. Loving God and having fear and awe from God. And he's telling the person, I'm going to tell you how to achieve that. So that's starting with a person who's perhaps an atheist or questioning to investigate whether or not there's a God. And then he defines what he's supposed to do is investigate his actions. His actions is a description of what this person has in mind when he does the investigation. I'm just investigating the actions of the Creator, who I am trying to come to love and have awe and fear for. So don't read it beyond its intention. It's not supposed to convince atheists. That's no one. Now, the truth is that in the Sefer Mitzvos, the Rambam writes about love, and he speaks about how to achieve love, and he adds to the picture there knowledge of Torah. Here he talks about his actions and creations. Could you include Torah in his actions and creations? You could possibly. You could, though if he meant it, I think it should have been mentioned explicitly, especially since it mentions it explicitly in the Sefer HaMitzvos. And later on he quotes other verses which don't obviously include that. So I'm not going to push it, but I will mention that in the Guide of the Perplexed, where he returns to this theme, he mentions both. So I'm going to speak about this complete picture, of which here there's only a fragment. I could be wrong about this. So then you could take me teaching about what he says in the guide. So you look at the world, the whole of the physical creation. You look at the human being, the nature of the human being. You look at the Torah that he commanded, and he says you understand the greatness of his wisdom. Now, I think, especially with what he says in the Sefer HaMitzvos, it's not that you're observing something from the outside and you're looking at it and you're overwhelmed by how wise it is, like you might say about Einstein's brain, or you might say about if you were too naive, you would say it about a computer program that can play Go and beat the best human player. That's naive and foolish, I think, but okay. Because in the Torah, he has a program for human living, both individual and social. He has a goal for the creation of the world. There's a goal for the progress of the world. So it is not simply the creation of a great genius who then went on vacation. No, he set up a relationship with us through this creation. He's guiding us with individual providence the whole time. All of that is included in studying the Torah and coming to understand what it says, also studying history, and also studying the physical world. So if you have all of this information about what God is doing, and by implication what he is, then you'll want to be close to him, you'll want to share with him, you'll want to be in a relationship with him, and you could get to the point where you would come to a point of loving him. That, I think, is the way to explain this part. Then he says, when a person thinks about these things, focuses on the words, mechashev is a PL, it's a strong word, these very things, immediately he is repulsed backwards, and he will stand in awe and fear. Now he puts in the word yifached in the Hebrew, so he clearly means awe and fear. And he will know that he is a small, weak creature, dark creature, with a light mind, meaning insignificant, small in extent, before the great one of complete pure knowledge. So the Rambam here is picturing a stage-by-stage process, and what is challenging in his description is that the stages are opposites of one another. Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to turn that off. Thank you. Because he starts with the overall impression of the subject, and that leads him to great love, and that leads him to want to draw close. If I would describe it phenomenologically, how one experiences it, he's focused on the goal. And then there comes a stage where he thinks, but how am I related to that goal? How am I related to that great being that I'm investigating? How do we stand in relationship to one another? And then he's overwhelmed with fear and with awe and with a sense of his own inadequacy, impotence, and he's driven back. I don't know if I can give you a good picture of this, but I'll try to give you an analogy. I don't know if you ever watched a child run, let's say a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old. You can see clearly there's only one thing in his mind, and that's there. And his body carries him there. Now, I believe, largely from my own experience, that what happens to people when the older they get, and they recognize their own frailty, their own capacity to be injured, you may have had an injury, or you experience pain, that when you're trying to accomplish something, you have two things in mind. One is getting there, and the other is, am I going to get there safely? And how much is it going to cost me? And how much pain am I going to have to endure? There's two things in your mind. There's you and the task. The child doesn't think that way. The child, in his mind, he's there already. His feet are just carrying him there. No sense of self whatsoever. Now, if you've ever done sports, you know very well your mental set is a great deal of what determines your performance. I can tell you with a very trivial example. Some bottles come with caps that are very, very tight, extremely tight. I know from my own experience, opening them can be difficult. And by some kind of divine providence, I had no clue what I was doing. At one point, I simply said, it's going to open. It has to open. It was easy. It was easy. I wasn't thinking about the fact that the ridges on the plastic cap were digging into my fingers. I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about the cap being open. And what was difficult and required strain and was painful, the pain disappeared. And the difficulty disappeared. I'm certainly strong enough to do it, and it opened without difficulty. I realized the mental set is an entirely different mental set. One is the effect is going to happen. For example, when people run in front of a car to save a child, they're not calculating, will I make it, won't I make it, what will happen to me, and so on. What they're calculating is the child out of the way of the car. And the body goes. So I think this is an analogy to the two mental sets that he's talking about. When you start learning it and discovering, and your mind is on fire with the complexity, the profundity, the subtlety, the care, the concern, the invitation into a relationship, and so forth and so on, the glory of that goal draws you. But at a certain point, you think, wait a minute, where am I going? Who am I? Do I belong there? Do I have any hopes of really mastering it? What kind of relationship could I stand into the creator of the universe, who, on the basis of a thought that it should be, brought 10 to the 22 stars into existence? And it meant nothing. And so forth and so on. So the first state of mind is where your mind is filled with the goal. And the second state of mind is where you have the goal in mind and you in mind, and you see a tremendous gap between what you are and the goal. And this generates two reactions. When your mind is filled with the goal, you're drawn to moving towards the goal. And when you measure the gap between you and the goal, then you think, I have no business here. I can't accomplish it, and I'm not appropriate to it. It's not meant for me, and you're propelled backwards. The Rambam here is describing a kind of seesaw process, back and forth. Now, one of the questions that arises, I saw this in print, someone who was fairly well known wrote this in criticism of somebody else, I'm not going to mention names, where he said that this picture is subject to a problem because you're talking about two mitzvos. One is love and one is awe and fear. They're both mitzvos. If the Rambam portrays them as opposites, it would follow that no one is capable of fully realizing both. Because if he is on the dimension of love, he's perforce not on the dimension of awe and fear. And of course, vice versa, which is the same thing. The two dimensions are incompatible. One is where he's being drawn forward, the other is where he's being propelled backward. Could this really be a description of these two mitzvos in such a way that is, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a system in which There are two of his mitzvahs that cannot both be fulfilled, certainly not simultaneously. Is that a reasonable way to understand the picture? Now, I agree that the question is, how should I say, logical, just so long as you don't pay attention to the words. But if you pay attention to the words, the question goes away immediately. Because the Rambam does not say this is what the performance of the mitzvahs looks like, not defining what it means to be one who has love and to be one who has awe and fear. He doesn't write that. This is the way in which you travel to get there. It's the process of developing them. If you know there's a process of developing them, you see right away. It doesn't follow that once you get there, it stays like that. It leaves open the possibility that once you get there, there's a possibility of uniting the two of them so that they can reinforce one another instead of being in conflict with one another, and the pendulum can be overcome. What he's saying is that in the process of development, you can't work on both simultaneously. So that means it's a distinction between the process and the product, and that's a perfectly reasonable distinction to make. Okay, so that leaves us with the question, well, how do you overcome the supposed contradiction in the product? And I think I have a solution. I think it's gently implicated in things that the Rambam writes elsewhere, but I never saw him address it word for word to this problem, so I'm submitting it as my speculation. I want to give you an analogy, and then I think you'll see how the analogy applies here. Let's suppose that you get in your mail, nowadays email, an invitation to a birthday party. Okay, nice to be invited. Who's the birthday invitation come from? Okay, here's a series of possibilities. One is a neighbor from down the street. You know him casually. You know his name, maybe once every month you stop and say hello, inviting you to a birthday party. The next possibility is your uncle, with whom over the years you've had some interactions, he's part of the family, so forth and so on. Uncle. The next one up is the mayor of your city. Now, you vote like everybody else, and you happen to vote for him and support him, and you're happy with him as functioning as mayor, and he's inviting you to his birthday party. Then you can go up the ladder. You can go up the ladder to your state senator, U.S. senator. You go up the ladder to the President of the United States. You go above that ladder to someone who's wise. Yeah, I meant that. Wise and kind. Someone who is a great saint, even in secular terms. Albert Schweitzer was supposed to have been a man who had very saintly qualities. Now ask yourself how you feel about the invitation to the birthday party, depending upon who sent it. I think, among other feelings you could feel, other things, the greater the person is who sent it, the more precious the invitation. In particular, as the person gets more and more superior to you, higher and higher in you in desirable qualities, the more precious it is that he invites you to be at his party. What? He invited me to be at the party? The invitation becomes more and more precious. The very fact that he's above you, the very fact that he's further and further above you, makes the invitation more precious. It doesn't lead you to pull back, distance yourself, and stress your lack of qualification, lack of appropriateness for being there. On the contrary, it just makes you feel immensely privileged to be invited and a tremendous desire to be there because of the fact that he is so much greater than you are. So here, your awe for him contributes to your connection with him and your love for him because he's invited you into a relationship. The awe magnifies the preciousness of the relationship and your desire to be involved in the relationship. Now, I think that's the way a way to reconcile the supposed contradiction, because God did exactly that. He invited us into a relationship, into, in a way, the most profound possible relationship. I'll give you another analogy to that. You imagine that George is a painter, up and coming, talented painter. Picasso has written a public call for an assistant. The person becomes an assistant for a year or 2 years. He washes his brushes and sets up his easel and buys his paints, watches him paint. Also, the assistant should be a painter himself, and Picasso will from time to time look at what the assistant is doing and give him some pointers, some advice. What do you think an up-and-coming painter would pay the opportunity to be Picasso's assistant? I think it would be very precious, okay? So fine, they put in their name, he picks it out, it's Paul. So Paul's invited to be Picasso's assistant, and he's there, and he's washing the brushes and watching him paint and getting comments from time to time. About halfway through the first year, Picasso says to Paul, you know something? I think you're pretty good. I think you're a pretty good painter, a pretty talented painter. I have a proposal. Let's paint pictures together. You'll paint the background, and I'll paint the subject in the foreground, okay? And then the pictures will come out, painted by Picasso and Paul. Picasso and what? Picasso and me? Paul? Picasso and Paul? That's the way it's going to come out? Could you imagine the thrill in his mind that his name will be attached to a painting which also has Picasso as the main painter? The greater Picasso is, the more thrilled Paul will be to be part of the joint product, right? Well, that's exactly what the Kodesh Baruch Hu offered us. We are partners in the process of perfecting the creation. God created the world with an enormous amount of potential, and he said, the realization of that potential is a project that I and mankind are going to work on together. So that when the world is perfected, the title on the world will be The Perfected World Produced by God and Reuven. Wow! God and Reuven? That's inconceivable. God is infinite. Yet, it's going to be God and Reuven. That's the way it's going to be labeled. So I think that's a very dramatic way to understand how the love on the one hand and the awe and fear on the other hand can go hand in hand with one another and reinforce one another. And that's how you can have both together. Not just together irrelevant to one another, or together as sort of side by side, but together in a profound interaction with one another, that the one reinforces the other. Are we together so far? Okay, now that's reinforcement on one side, but then there's another reinforcement on the other side. I've explained how the awe leads to love, but the love leads to awe and fear also. In the Akedah, when God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and he's prepared to do so, and the text is quite clear, he passed the test because he was prepared to sacrifice his son. Don't be taken in by the terrible misrepresentation that the point of the story was that he was told not to sacrifice his son, that human sacrifice is primitive and savage and irrational and immoral, and that the whole point of it is to tell you can't do that. The story doesn't say that. What the story says is, you passed the test because when I told you to sacrifice your son, you were ready to sacrifice your son. And then the title for Abraham's accomplishment is Ati Yadati Ki Yirei L'Chimata. I now know that you have Yira for me. Meaning he made known. I'm not going to fight that battle at the moment, but that's what it means. Look at Rashi there. So, the title of the accomplishment is Yira. Now, Abraham is known as the one who loves God. Zera Avraham Ohavi. You are the descendants of Abraham who loves me. Why is the title of this particular accomplishment Yira? Awe. So it's a long story. I'm not going to go through the whole story now. But one thing that happens when you love someone and the other one loves you, a love relationship, that is immensely precious. It's immensely precious. And what that generates is a fear to lose it. I don't want to lose that. That may be the most precious thing in my life. So anything which could weaken or injure that relationship is something that I'm going to be very afraid of, because it cost me something infinitely precious. This is what some Sfarim, I think it's the Gemara in Soto means this, for those who know, that there's a year that grows out of Ahava. There's a year that grows out of love. And one way to describe that is the fear of losing the love. That's what, one way to understand that verse there, that I now know that the love you have for me is so precious that you are, so to speak, scared to death of losing it. Now, that means that the more precious the love is, the more complete, the more profound the love is, the more there will be a fear of losing the love. And that's the way in which love can contribute to the Yira side of the relationship with God. You get to a point where you've gone through at least enough of the process to say you've qualified for a level of both. They live together because each one can have a positive effect on the other. They're working together to create the whole. Now, though Zohar says many times that love and awe and fear are the wings with which mitzvos fly to present themselves before the Creator. There's a parable which was told in the Hasidic world. This may have happened. I don't know if it really happened, but if not, it's a parable where a Hasidic master was invited to a non-Orthodox synagogue to speak or to pray or to whatever. And he said, I'm sorry that I have to refuse you because your synagogue is a house full of prayer. So they said, Rabbi, because our house is full of prayer, that's why you can't come to pray here or to speak here. He said, let me explain to you. When a Jew prays, that creates an angel. And the purpose of the angel is to take the prayer and present it before God. The angel flies to God. But your prayers create angels with broken wings. So your angels are all on the floor. And I don't want to trample on those angels. I don't want to walk on those angels. Your house is a house full of prayer. I don't want to go in there. Right? It isn't perhaps what they were expecting. So, what we're being told is, and there's a formula that Sephardi Jews and Hasidic Jews, what can I say for the Ashkenazim? They have to answer for themselves. They don't say it, but the rest of us do, which speaks about doing the mitzvah with the chilu l'chibu, which means with awe and fear on the one hand and with love on the other hand, because those are the two wings with which the mitzvah, so to speak, is presented before God. Now, what this means is this. When you do a mitzvah, what makes the action godly and what makes it ideally godly? Let's take obedience. Listen, the Creator of the world told me to do this. That's as much authority as you need. You don't need any more authority than that. He told me I have to do it because it's the right thing to do. So I do it because I do my duty. I live up to my responsibilities, even above reward and punishment. No, even without reward and punishment, I do what I'm responsible to do. What God commands, I'm responsible to do. That could be without love and without awe. What we are being told is that mitzvah lacks the wings that will present it before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That doesn't mean you haven't satisfied the obligation. You've fulfilled the law. You've done it. You don't have to do it again. But it means that in spiritual terms, it's very, I would say, weak, immature, It hasn't developed the impact that it's supposed to have. This idea is reflected in a famous Zohar, which makes a very important philosophical point. You can ask people this. If they don't know the right answer, it's very likely that they won't guess it. Are mitzvos intrinsically valuable? The difference between intrinsic and extrinsic value is something's intrinsically valuable if it's valuable for itself, where you could say correctly, why are you doing X? Because X needs to be done. Sof pasuk, end of story. That's intrinsic value. Extrinsic value is where you do X in order to get Y. In and of itself, wouldn't be worth anything if it didn't get you to Y. He says, why are you working? To earn money. Why do you want to earn money? Earn money. If he says to earn money, he's got a problem. He's earning money to earn money, he's got a problem. Well, you ought to say they're earning money to spend it on X, Y, Z, which are very important. He just wants more rectangular green pieces of paper. That's all he wants. That's sick. That's a sickness. Okay, so now, something of intrinsic value is like fulfilling an obligation. Often enough, doesn't have to be every time, but often enough, if you do something which you are obliged to do, somebody says to you, why are you doing that? You say, because it has to be done. I had an obligation to do it, and I did it. I didn't do it for my reputation. I didn't do it for people to like me. I didn't do it to earn money. I did it because I have a moral obligation to do it, and I'm fulfilling that obligation. That's something that's intrinsic. Now, are mitzvos like fulfilling the moral obligation, or are mitzvos like money? To put the question brutally. Do mitzvos have intrinsic value or only extrinsic value? The correct answer is only extrinsic value. Mitzvos do not have intrinsic value. Shock, surprise, astonishment. The Zohar calls the mitzvos taryag itin. Itin is a word in Jerusalem Aramaic which means strategies. In Hebrew it's eitzah. There are 613 eitzos. What is a strategy? A strategy is a procedure by which you get something else. Somebody's working on a strategy. You ask him, why are you doing that? It's because I'm working on the strategy. That's what I'm doing. I work on strategies. I just work on them. He's got a problem. Because inherently, the strategy is to get something else. If not going for something else, a waste of time. So what is the something else that the mitzvahs are aimed at? Dveikus. Connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Every mitzvah, if it's done for its own sake, if it's done because the Kodesh Baruch Hu commanded to, will bring you to a connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And that's the goal. So now, the idea of the mitzvah presenting itself before God, the idea of the mitzvah connecting the person to God, is now both a give and take relationship. If the mitzvah is supposed to produce that connection, and on the other hand, it's the connection which draws the mitzvah close to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. They reinforce one another. The connection is love and fear. Love, fear, and awe. That's the connection. That's the nature of the connection from the point of view of the person. That's why the Rambam puts it here. There are lots of mitzvahs in the Torah. Not only are there lots of mitzvahs, but there are mitzvahs of belief and of feeling and of attitude. He only puts the two here. Because these two are the center of your relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, altogether. That's why you want to know how to get there, and that's why you want to know that. So the idea of connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu is supposed to be the essence of every mitzvah. Indeed, I heard my Rebbe a year and a half ago before Shavuos, she was giving a webinar, and I was listening in, and she said, we're coming to Shavuos, where we received the Torah, where we got the 10 pronouncements, where the mitzvos became obligatory upon us, and when you hear the idea of mitzvah, of commandment, what do you think of? So I thought, I think of right and wrong, and good and bad, and obligation and duty, and reward and punishment, and responsibility, and that's what I think of. And she said, relationship. I said, what? Relationship? Oh yeah, that's right, I guess. Relationship, sure. I mean, he's commanding me. I'm related to him. He has a reason for the commandment. But, it didn't occur to me on my own. That's what's going on. But that's a general principle that underlies an enormous amount of what Yiddishkeit is. It's a relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So love on the one hand and awe and fear on the other hand are the basic elements in the relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. This is why we have the famous Avinu Malkeinu prayer, Our Father, whom appropriate circumstances you love your father, and the king, whom you have awe and fear from. And they're put together in that way. By the way, if you look carefully, you'll see that it's not just in the Avinu Malkeinu that we say on fast days, or we say on the 10 days of repentance, of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but in the regular prayers also. If you look carefully, you'll see it quite a number of times. And it's always Father first and King second. We've spoken about that on a number of occasions. But again, it's those two elements. So it means that one shouldn't think of awe and fear as very exalted and beyond the capability of normal people and average people, and something only for great saints, great holy people, great righteous people. The truth is, as Maimonides says in the 10th chapter of the Laws of Repentance, complete accomplishment, especially of love, is very rare. But it's a matter of degree. It's not all or nothing, not either or. And one can work on the elements and work on the way in which you should get there, which is really all you have in your hands. Your ability is to step on the path and to take steps on the path, which means to study and to analyze God's creations, including the Torah, and to try to understand who God is behind that. What are God's purposes in the world? What kind of, so to speak, character does God display in the world? For the aficionados, those last words are very important. What is shown, what is displayed, not what he is. What he is beyond our ability to know altogether. But he displays and shows certain things. That we can learn and relate to. And also to take account of our position. If I take account of my position correctly, where the Rambam wrote that I'll be pushed backwards because of my inadequacy and my failures, that will lead me also to treasure the fact that he's invited me to be in this relationship with him. Now, I want it to be clear, even though the Rambam writes how the distance between us, God and us, that doesn't reduce our participation to insignificance. This is not a trivial point. It's a point that's quite subtle philosophically, and I can at least start to describe it. First, let me try to give you a demonstration that it's so, and then we'll talk about how and why it's so. During the Second World War, there were Americans who were not eligible for the Army. They were too old, or they had disabilities, and they volunteered for the Army, and they told the Army personnel, I cannot sit here on the sidelines when we are fighting to defeat the Nazis. I cannot do that. I must be part of it. Defeating the Nazis is too important to just sit back and wait for the results. I would feel like what's the right word? I will feel that I have not participated in something that demands everyone's absolute allegiance. I will feel like a deserter from a cause that I really should participate in. Now, I know the laws don't require it of me. It's a democratic country. I'm not objecting, but I want to be part of it. So, yeah, I think you can understand that sentiment. I'll give you another example. I lived through the period of putting the first man on the moon. I think it was 1961, when 57, when the Soviets put up the first satellite, Sputnik, and the United States was in shock, those primitive Russians. They put up the first satellite. So in 1961, Jack Kennedy said, by the end of the decade, we'll be on the moon. That was very bold. He was assassinated, if I remember correctly, in 1962. 1969, Armstrong set foot on the moon within a decade. It was an astonishing achievement. There were people who thought it was impossible for various reasons. Anyway, he did it. Now, let's say it took 10,000 people to do that. All the manufacturers and the people planning and the programs, the computers, all the rest. Imagine a guy whose job was to test the computers. Going from facility to facility to test it, that's all. He's a computer expert. And he's testing to make sure the computers are working right. How did he feel when Neil Armstrong set his foot on the moon? He felt, we did it. We did it. There were 9,999 other people in the project. If he hadn't done it, they'd have gotten somebody else to do it, or they'd have spread out the hours on the other people who were testing the computers. So what? He did it. And if you take somebody else who's working at a television factory, whose project is to destroy the human mind, and he also tests computers to make sure the computers are working, he wouldn't have any such satisfaction, even though qualitatively they're doing exactly the same thing. They're testing computers and making sure they're working correctly. But one is part of this immense project of someone putting someone on the moon, and the other is not part of that project. So by adjoining yourself to an enormous group project, you acquire for yourself the significance of the project, even if the amount that you contribute to the project would make no measurable difference. This guy who volunteers for the American Army, the Allied armies, I think, were something like 2 million men or 3 million men. So this is 2 million versus 2 million plus 1. Is that going to bring the war to an end a week earlier and save lives? No, it is not. But I can't sit on the sidelines. I can't do that. I have to help fight the Nazis. So even if it doesn't make a measurable difference in the outcome, still there's a significance in doing what you're doing. Now let me make it more vivid for you by taking a more practical example. Let's imagine that 10 people pick up a 300-pound boulder. Each one's carrying 30 pounds. That's not so difficult. And they pick it up, and then they carry it over to your stereo set, and they drop it on the stereo set and smash it flat. Nasty guys, right? So now you capture them and you put them on trial, okay? The first one is George. George, a criminal, destroyed my stereo set cost $4,000. Listen, mine's a set, let me tell you. $4,000, you're a terrible criminal. Now suppose George says, listen, there were 10 of us, it weighed 300 pounds, 9 could easily have carried it. So my carrying it didn't make any difference. Didn't make any difference. If I had not been there, the outcome would have been exactly the same. So I didn't really do anything. So why are you complaining to me? Now you say, okay, but every one of them could make the same argument. True, that's true. And then the result would be absurd because no one would be responsible. That's true, but what's wrong with the argument? It's still true that had he not been there, the result would have been exactly the same. So this is an interesting philosophical puzzle. One way to handle it is this. I'll give you one more analogy. Let's suppose a person's in an accident and he's got life-threatening injuries, and the ambulance brings him into the emergency room, and the doctor on call saves his life. So when he recovers, he comes in and wants, I want to express my gratitude to you. You know, without you, I'd have been dead. The guy says, listen, I was happy to do what I did, and I'm very pleased that you're grateful, but don't exaggerate. If I hadn't done it, somebody else would have done it. You know, there were 6 of us on call, and if I wasn't there, then somebody else would have been taking my place, and there would have been somebody else, and somebody else would have done it. Listen carefully. I was not necessary for you to survive. I was not necessary for you to survive. You shouldn't say that without me, you would have been dead. That's not true. Okay. So should the victim then say, oh, you know, you're not only a good doctor, you're a good philosopher. You taught me something. So therefore, I'm not grateful to you? Is that what he should say? No, of course not, because this doctor did save him. So you have to distinguish between what are called necessary and sufficient conditions. This doctor's treatment saved him. That he produced the outcome. That's a fact. A separate, independent question is whether, had he not done it, the guy would have died. But that had nothing to do with the fact that he, in fact, did cause him to live. And if you are the cause or part of the cause, the fact that you weren't necessary doesn't deprive you of the significance of the outcome. The doctor on call does deserve credit. He saved his life. And the fact that if he hadn't been there, he would have been saved anyway, doesn't deprive him of credit for, I didn't say how much credit, maybe it's a little difference in the amount, but it certainly deserves credit for it. So the same thing with George. Yeah. Had you not been there, the other 9 guys would have been able to carry the boulder and destroy my stereo. But you carried it, didn't you? You were part of the cause that destroyed my then therefore you bear responsibility for it. The fact that you weren't necessary doesn't matter. And the same thing's true with the soldier who's number 1 out of 2,000,001. He is part of the force which won the war. If he hadn't been there, I would have been one in the same way. That's true. But he was there. And he was part of it. And that being the case, he gets credit for being part of it. So in the very same way, when Kodesh Baruch Hu says, I want you to be my partners in perfecting the creation, the person thinks, but he could do it on his own. He doesn't need us. Right. He doesn't need us. Neither did the other guys need George. Neither did the accident victim need this doctor to save him. That doesn't mean you're not doing anything. Baruch Hu said, in the end, we're going to do it together. You are going to participate in the process of making the world complete. That's a gigantic opportunity, gigantic credit, and it's something which Kodesh Baruch Hu makes possible for us. And that's the engine of reconciliation between love on the one hand and awe and fear on the other hand. Yeah.
Just one question. At the beginning we talked about the guy who goes and saves a child in the car. So, isn't there a halacha that you're not allowed to commit suicide by saving somebody else?
Saves the guy in the car? Did I talk about that tonight?
The child, yeah. I mean, when he jumps in to save the child. The part of that.
Oh, he jumped no, he jumped in front of the car to save the child. Well, I was talking about an automatic reflex. I don't think people, they see the child, they see the car bearing down the child, and they go.
Right.
Now, it's true that it depends on how much danger you're talking about. What significant danger is. It is a question whether you're allowed to endanger yourself in order. You're certainly not allowed to give up your life in order to save somebody. Well, you're certainly not obligated to do. And whether you're allowed to is machlokes, the Rambam and Tosfos. It's a complicated subject, but it has to be handled with care. It has to be handled with care. It's not an obvious thing to do. And certainly, if you know that even if you're going to die. Even if you're going to die, it's machlokes between the Rabbi and Tosfos whether you can do that, whether it's laudable to do that. I don't think anybody says you have to, though, that you're obligated to do it. Yeah. Other questions? No? Okay.